It's Thursday here on The Story, and tonight we've got an update on that first person arrested under the new state law targeting drug use on public transit. Hard to prosecute someone who doesn't show up to court. Plus, Washington Senator Maria Cantwell grilling President-elect Trump's nominee for Transportation Secretary, getting him on the record about billions earmarked for projects in the Northwest. And finally, Oregon's legislative session is less than a week away. We sit down with leaders on both sides of the aisle to talk priorities and if another walkout is on the table. It's our big story tonight. Well, here's a live look at the state capitol in Salem tonight. The legislative session is set to begin on Tuesday, and today, state leaders, including Governor Tina Kotek, laid out their priorities. The governor made a point of saying just how focused she is on bills related to creating more housing. And we got the usual political line of trying to support efforts to reduce costs for Oregonians. But overall, she wants everyone to remember why lawmakers are there in the first place.
We have people who are living outside. We have people who can't afford their homes. We have people who need mental health and addiction treatment. And our schools just have to do a better job for our kids. So I'm going to keep bringing it back to why we're here and try to keep the legislature focused on those top priorities.
So no surprise, both parties are focused on the hot button topics like building more housing, addressing homelessness and mental health, funding Oregon's transportation system, and education. This year, the Democrats have a supermajority in both the House and Senate, which means, in theory, Democrats could increase taxes or pass new taxes without a single Republican vote. Will Democrats do that? We'll see, but the option is there. This week, our team sat down with the new House Majority Leader, Democrat Ben Bowman, and new Senate Republican Leader Daniel Bonham.
Tremendous opportunity for that, and quite frankly,
I think we have a clear sense of the challenges in front of us, and now we've got 6 months to do everything we can to make life better for Oregonians.
I think the Republicans' vision for this session is do no harm. Can this government come together during this legislative session, review policies that we put forward, find out whether or not the things we've told agencies to do had a positive impact?
Okay, let's start with the issues of housing and homelessness. When Governor Tina Kotek first took office in 2023, she set the ambitious statewide goal of building 36,000 new housing units each year. Well, that has not happened. Not even close. This year, the governor says she will prioritize bills that support building middle housing options. That's everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes, what she calls stronger pathways to homeownership. Here's how legislative leaders see the housing shortage.
For me and for my caucus, when we think about housing, the number one challenge we think of is it is too expensive to live in Oregon. People can't afford their rents. They can't afford to buy a home. My generation, millennials, are buying homes at much later in their life than their parents were. So we need to make housing more affordable in this state. And my belief is that the most important thing we can do to make housing more affordable is to build more housing, more types of all housing.
We've got to actually get into some concrete land use considerations. We've got to get into something that incentivizes people to build when times are tough. Cost of money is high, cost of products are high, cost of labor is high. Labor is also scarce. We need to do some concrete things to actually move the needle in that subject matter.
Another priority for both parties is education. That includes teacher pay and if more money should be sent to school districts, and if so, how much? The Democrats want to invest more in schools and curriculum. Republicans say there is enough money already. It just needs to be spent wisely.
The money's there. $137 billion is a massive state budget. We have more resources than we know what to do with. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. And getting that money to the classroom is something I think we do share in common with the majority party. I think we want to see teachers well paid. I think we want to see schools well funded.
We need to invest more in schools, but we also need to produce better outcomes. And I'm excited about some of the work we did in the last legislative session. You probably remember the Early Literacy Success Initiative, where we invested almost $200 million in targeted instruction based on what we know, based on research, evidence-based practices are actually going to lead to better reading retention and reading skill development for kids. So those kinds of initiatives where we're investing in proven strategies that are research-based I think are really promising for the state.
Now, the next big issue that we've been telling you about for months now is transportation funding. We're expecting a massive funding package to come out of this session. For some context, the last time lawmakers put one of those together was back in 2017, and it came with a $5.3 billion price tag. It also included tolling that sort of flew under the radar at the time. Governor Kotek paused new tolling efforts until 2026, but several ideas have been tossed around regarding how to fund ODOT in order to keep up maintenance for things like fixing potholes and finishing current projects. Those ideas are things like a pay-per-mile tax, increased registration fees at the DMV, raising the gas tax, or maybe a combination.
My constituents do remember the 2017 package, believe it or not. Like, people are like, hey, you just told us you solved this problem 7 years ago. You added a 10-cent fuel charge. You added a employment tax that was going to a statewide transit fund. So what were the things that you promised me last time, and did I get them? Is the Rose Quarter fixed? Is the Abernathy Bridge resolved? I'm still getting stuck in Wilsonville. The roundabout coming out of Crooked River Ranch into Terrebonne never got built. Like, people are saying, I thought I already paid for this stuff, and now you're coming back and you're asking for a 50% increase to a state agency budget. That's insane.
It is critical that we pass a transportation package this session. It is really, really important, and here's why. If we don't pass a transportation package, a lot of your viewers, I'm sure, are driving on roads with potholes, with really bad congestion, that makes it take a lot longer for them to get to work or drop their kids off at school. If we don't pass a transportation package, those problems will get worse.
And that transportation funding package is where the Democrats' supermajority could play a major role. Let's break this down for you. Take a look. Remember, in order to raise current taxes or create a new one, lawmakers need a 3/5 majority vote. Democrats have exactly that in both chambers, 18 in the 30-person Senate and 36 in the 60-person House, meaning if they can get all Democrats in both chambers to vote for a new or increased tax, it won't matter what Republicans do. And that brings us to a tool in the toolbox, if you will, that both Republicans and Democrats have used in the Oregon legislature over the past few decades. That's walkouts. Who can forget the 2023 session, a 6-week walkout by Senate Republicans, the longest in Oregon history and second longest in U.S. history. Measure 113 that was passed by voters in 2022 was supposed to discourage walkouts by disqualifying those with 10 or more unexcused absences from holding office again after their current terms. But some lawmakers sacrificed their state political careers instead. Oregon is one of 4 states where, in order to do any state business, 2/3 of lawmakers must be present for what's called a quorum. And even though Democrats have a supermajority, 3/5 in each chamber, they do not have a quorum by themselves, which requires 2/3. Aren't fractions fun here? In the Senate, Democrats would need 2 Republicans to be there for a quorum. And in the House, Democrats would need 4. So even with Measure 113 hanging over their heads, will Republicans resort to another walkout this time around?
But I don't think we can commit to removing any tool from what's available to us through the Constitution. We fully recognize there's a consequence now if we choose to utilize that mechanism for accountability, but we certainly wouldn't cross it off the list of things that are available to us.
I'm hopeful that there won't be walkouts this session. Obviously, it takes 2 to tango, and that means my side, the Democrats, need to work with Republicans, and it also means the Republicans need to show up and work with Democrats. I will say, in the last 2 years, there have been no walkouts in the House. That doesn't mean we always agreed, but it does mean that we had a good process for working together and working through our differences.
Now, we're already getting a look at some bills in Salem that were pre-filed ahead of the session, and that includes 2 bills that have to do with the homeless crisis. We'll pull them up for you here. Take a look. We want to first talk about House Bill 2696. It has to do with homeless camps on public property and what happens to all the stuff that accumulates once it's removed. The bill would require removal crews to give homeless people 72 hours notice and post that notice in both English and Spanish. That 72 hours part is the threshold here in Portland already, but it's not a statewide law. Another piece of the bill defines what personal property means and requires it to be stored for at least 30 days. In Multnomah County, the bill says that a storage facility for that property must be within 6 blocks of public transit, and homeless people must be given a phone number to call so they can find out where that storage facility is. This does not apply to weapons or drugs, though. Those would be thrown away. I want to add, this bill is a bipartisan bill. There are 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats sponsoring it. I talked with Democrat Representative Paul Evans. He represents a district that includes Monmouth and parts of Salem.
We have to have some standardization of expectation. And what the bill does to me, it has to do with private property. It has to do with when there is a movement of a camp, what happens to the private property left thereafter. And while I am a big believer in local government, and I believe local government should have the abilities to make those kinds of decisions and protect the public safety, I also believe it's probably not the best idea to have 199 different solutions. So to me, this is simply adding order to really what is a chaotic situation where every community is probably following their own guidelines.
Now, when it comes to posting campsites for removal, you've probably seen those lime green pieces of paper hanging from trees or on the side of RVs. There they are right there. This bill would make it so those camp removal notices could not be posted within 200 feet of another notice or within 2 hours after an initial posting.
It doesn't make any sense to put something the day of, there's a campsite clearing, and then people are left not knowing how many hours they have, what they can do, when it began, etc. I think you have to give people ample notice. I think you have to be transparent in what you're trying to do. And at the same token, there is a lot of stuff that just needs to be managed.
Representative Evans says it all comes down to creating one statewide standard for campsite removals to preserve public peace, health, and safety. Now, if passed, it includes an emergency clause, meaning it would take effect immediately if Governor Kotek signed it into law. The other bill we want to talk about is Senate Bill 359. It's about the environmental impacts of homeless camps. This one would allow anyone to submit a complaint to the Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ, if waste from a camp is being discharged into state waters, giving priority to sources of drinking water. If that's the case, the people staying at the camp would be removed and the site would be cleaned, which frankly is something that should be happening anyways. This bill would enshrine it into law. Now let's touch on Washington's legislative session in Olympia, where lawmakers returned this past Monday, facing an eye-popping budget deficit, somewhere in the neighborhood of $12 billion over the next 4 years. Washington lawmakers have about 100 days to figure it out. The previous governor, Jay Inslee, and new governor Bob Ferguson, who was inaugurated yesterday, have different ideas about how to tackle that shortfall. Inslee and some Democratic leaders in the House and Senate want to tax the state's wealthiest residents. Inslee's plan would impose a 1% tax on wealth valued over $100 million and go hand in hand with around $2 billion in budget cuts. Forecasters say this would net the state a little over 10 of the $12 billion deficit over the 4 years after it takes effect. Governor Ferguson, on the other hand, is proposing several budget cuts to close the gap. He's asking the state agency heads to come up with ways to find around 6% in savings or cuts, except K-12 schools and public safety agencies like the Washington State Patrol and Department of Corrections, who would not have to trim down. Other priorities this session include several proposals to direct more money to law enforcement agencies and a bill that would cap the amount landlords can raise rent in a single year at 7% statewide. We'll keep an eye on Olympia to see what lawmakers decide on, and we will keep you updated. Well, from Olympia and Salem to our nation's capital this week, President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet picks began going through Senate confirmation hearings, and the Pacific Northwest was discussed quite a bit during Wednesday's hearing for Sean Duffy, Trump's nominee to lead the Department of Transportation, or DOT. That's because Oregon and Washington are lined up to receive billions of dollars in DOT grant funding in the next few years for big transportation projects. There's a $200 million grant for the Hood River Bridge replacement, $450 million for the Rose Quarter project, two big ones for the Interstate Bridge replacement, totaling around $2.1 billion, And another one announced this week, $30 million to help build a cap over part of I-5 in Vancouver as part of the Interstate Bridge project. These grants were all awarded in the past year or so, and they all come from programs that were established by President Joe Biden's landmark infrastructure law in 2021. So with Trump soon taking office and vowing to dismantle many of Biden's policies, there's naturally some concern about whether that money could get yanked back, putting major projects in jeopardy, or stopping any more funding from going to projects who may still rely on it to get to the finish line. Washington Senator Maria Cantwell took those concerns straight to Trump's DOT nominee to see where he stands.
The issue about, projects that, I mentioned the I-5 bridge when we spoke, the infrastructure investment that's already been planned, that the money has been out the door and has been, it's on its way to doing the work. Will you commit to helping complete these projects that and continue the funding?
That are underway, yes. And again, one of the complaints I've heard from the committee is oftentimes the money is not moving fast enough. There's been questions about why it's taking so long. So I'd love to work with you and make sure that the money gets out the door to the projects that are underway.
So Duffy sounded cooperative, but Senator Cantwell made sure to get him on the record about this over and over. That conversation you just heard basically happened 3 times over the course of the hearing.
Are you a supporter of the Jones Act?
Yes.
Thank you. Are you a supporter of the mega and freight and at-grade crossing programs that we established under the recent service transportation bill?
Yes, and I think this fits in with kind of the vision that President Trump has of those big projects that are so meaningful to communities that I think you mentioned in your office that oftentimes don't get done because they're really expensive. So yes, that's important.
So are you going to honor those commitments?
Yeah, I would anticipate honoring those commitments, especially if the law has been followed and the agreements are being met. I think I might get some backlash from this committee if you're halfway through a project and there was an effort to pull funding. So no, projects are going well, funding's flowing, and the deal is being met. I don't see an issue with that.
Okay, so it looks like that's about as much of an answer as we're going to get. But the focus there was about the projects that are underway and the money that's out the door. What about grants that have not been awarded yet? There's one in particular we're thinking of. Capital Investment Grants. It's a program specifically for public transportation projects, and it's the last big missing piece of the Interstate Bridge funding plan. They've applied for $1 billion from that program for the light rail portion of the project. But this particular grant program has a multi-year evaluation process, so this application won't get final answers from the DOT until well into Trump's term. And the only time it came up during this hearing is when Senator Cantwell asked Duffy if he was committed to working with the Committee on Public Transportation Investment. His full answer was, quote, "I am." So not a lot to go off of there, but you can bet the story team will be keeping an eye on the future of those massive transportation projects that rely heavily on federal funds. Well, coming up next on the story, an update on the case of the first person charged under the new state law cracking down on drug use on public transit. Last night, we told you about the arrest, but there's another layer to the story that will have you shaking your head. That's next when we come back. Well, now to an update on the first person arrested and charged under a new state law, increasing penalties for using hard drugs on public transit. We first told you about it last night. Earlier this week, a sergeant with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office was working a mission in plain clothes, so undercover, and got on the MAX train at the Convention Center transit station. Court documents say he spotted a woman using fentanyl in the train, and she was taken into custody. Now, if we stop the story right there, many of you may think, great, just like this viewer named Mitch.
I wanted to give a shout out to the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office for actually putting a deputy on the trains in plain clothes looking for this. Awesome. And yes, I agree. This is for the safety of Joe Blow like me who wants to get on a train and not get high doing it. Outrageous. Good job.
Okay, but that is not where this story ends. After her arrest, she was booked into jail and just a few hours later, released and told to show up in court the next day for her arraignment. But she didn't show up. And another viewer named Rich summed that up better than we could. He says the report of the arrest and the fact that it is now a higher level offense doesn't mean too much if the result is the same. She's back out on the streets in just a couple of hours. All right, take a look. Remember the 3 ballot boxes that were set on fire leading up to the past November election? The person who did it is still out there. But today, the FBI says they know how the suspect did it. They just can't seem to track that person down. John Adams has been following this for us today and brings us these new details. John.
Yeah, Blair, the FBI says they believe the suspect used a combination of metal shavings and iron oxide, something called thermite, to create that incendiary device that caught those ballot boxes on fire and caused them to burn. Now, they say thermite can burn at extremely high temperatures. It's something that is commonly used by welders, but in the hands of someone that doesn't know what they're doing with it, it can be extremely dangerous.
Okay, so John, are they close to catching the guy who did this?
Well, Blair, it is hard to say. They have been primarily relying on surveillance video, and they have been asking the public to be on the lookout for a dark-colored Volvo S60 from about 2003 to 2004. They say it's possible the suspect painted the car a different color or even sold or tried to sell it. Now, the FBI has received multiple tips about the case, but are still asking for the public's help. Now, this is what they want people to do. They want people to be on the lookout for anyone that may have had special interest in this case, maybe be paying extremely close attention to what happens in this case. And they also want people to be on the lookout for anyone that they know that may have shown a newfound interest in welding or incendiary devices. Blair?
All right, John Adams, downtown for us tonight. Thank you. Well, KGW will be carrying live coverage of the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump on Monday. Coverage of the event from the heart of our nation's capital begins at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Again, that's Monday right here on KGW. Well, that is the end of our show, folks. Thanks so much for watching. The best way to catch up on the story if you've missed an episode is to stream it on your own schedule. Just download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. We hope you have a great Thursday night, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.